The sky above the sprawling cedar forests of the Mount Kumatori did not merely darken, it fractured with a sound, like a planetary spine snapping under the weight of a dying star. The atmospheric pressure in the Kanto region buckled inward, as if seized by an invisible titan-sized hand, crushing the ambient light of the moon into a singularity of unnatural violet and suffocating grey. There was no wind to herald this arrival, only a sudden crushing increase in gravity that flattened the ancient trees of the forest's splintering trunks that had stood for centuries into matchsticks in the span of a single heartbeat. The silence that followed was not the quiet of peace, but the vacuum of a predator inhaling before a kill. A silence so profound that the insects in the soil ceased their movement, and the nocturnal birds fell dead from the branches, their hearts ruptured by the sudden shift in atmospheric density. This was not the biological terror of a demon, the wet and hungry malice that the Demon Slayer Corps had hunted for 1,000 years, but something older, colder, and infinitely more disciplined. The fabric of reality tore open, not with a mystical hum, but with a mechanical scream, a jagged wound in the night sky that bled smoke and static electricity, scarring the retinas of the charcoal burners in the valley below, who looked up to see a geometry of darkness descending from the heavens. In the dimensional rift, the fundamental laws of this world groaned in protest, as the spiritual energy of the land, the faint whispers of gods and ancestors that permeated the soil of Japan, were silenced by a roaring void that demanded total submission. From the center of the crater, formed by the gravitational collapse, a figure emerged, not born of flesh and blood mutation, but encased in a life-support tomb of black durasteel and plasteel. A walking sarcophagus that hissed with a rhythmic mechanical respiration. This sound, a wet and recycled cycle of intake and exhalation, cut through the mountain air, utterly alien to the total concentration, breathing practiced by the swordsman hidden in the shadows of history, to the demons watching from the darkest recesses of the forest, creatures who believed themselves the apex predators of the night. This new presence felt like looking into the eye of a sun that had long since burned out, leaving only a cold, crushing gravity. Far away in the shifting labyrinth of the Infinity Castle, the demon king Kibutsuji Muzan felt a tremor run through his very cells, a sensation he had not experienced in centuries, a vibration that was not fear, but a profound biological confusion, as his control over his demon subjects flickered for a microsecond. The blood connection that bound his species was momentarily drowned out by a signal of absolute hate broadcasting from the mountains, a frequency of malice that did not bargain with biology or mutation, but commanded the space around it through sheer will, bending the light and the air to its dominance. The forest floor around the impact site began to die, the grass withering and turning to grey ash, not from heat, but from the sheer necrosis of the dark side, leaching the vitality from the earth to fuel the stranger's survival. The black armored entity took a step, the heavy magnetic lock of his boot crushing a stone into dust, his cape moving against a wind that did not exist. He reached out a gloved hand not to cast a spell, but to grip the unseen throat of the world itself. A nearby Asiatic black bear, maddened by the disturbance, charged from the tree line with foam at its mouth only to stop mid-stride, suspended in the air by an invisible grip that tightened until the beast's neck snapped with a wet crack, its massive body tossed aside like a discarded rag. The stranger did not look at the kill. He simply stood, his helmet reflecting the fractured moonlight, his internal sensors calibrating to a galaxy that contained no empire, no emperor, and no chaotic rebellion, only a primitive teeming darkness that would require order. The red blade ignited a beam of coherent plasma that hissed with a predatory hum, casting a crimson wound across the pristine snow, signaling to every living thing in the radius that the hierarchy of power had just been violently rewritten. The sensors inside the helmet of the Dark Lord cycled through the electromagnetic spectrum, searching for the encrypted handshake of the Imperial fleet, but found only the static hiss of cosmic radiation and the primitive radio waves of a civilization in its infancy. Darth Vader stood amidst the burning wreckage of his meditation chamber, which had been torn from the hull of the Executor by the dimensional anomaly and deposited into the unforgiving gravity of this unknown world. The air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine resin and old blood, a combination that registered on his olfactory filters as distinctly organic and uncontrolled. He checked his life support systems and noted that the primary oxygen scrubbers were functioning at 80% capacity, a tolerable margin for a man who had spent decades living on the edge of suffocation. The red lenses of his mask scanned the horizon, where the jagged peaks of the Japanese mountains cut into the night sky like the teeth of a beast, and he concluded that he was stranded on a terrestrial planet in the outer rim, or perhaps entirely outside the known cartography of the galaxy. There was no despair in this realization, only the cold calculation of a strategist who viewed every catastrophe as a logistical problem to be solved through dominance. He stepped out of the impact crater, his black cape sweeping over the scorched earth, and began to walk down the mountain path, his heavy boots leaving deep indentations in the soil that would later be studied with trembling hands by the local authorities. The forest was alive with a presence that the Force interpreted as chaotic and hungry, a swirling miasma of malice that lacked the focused intent of the dark side, but possessed a feral intensity that he found mildly insulting. It was not long before the first of the local inhabitants revealed itself a creature that dropped from the canopy with unnatural speed, its pale skin glowing in the moonlight, and its eyes burning with a predatory hunger that recognized the dark figure not as a threat, but as a sealed container of meat. The demon, a lower-ranked scavenger that had feasted on travelers in these woods for decades, landed on all fours in front of Vader, its claws digging into the dirt and a low growl vibrating in its throat. It spoke in a dialect that Vader's translator matrix took a moment to decipher, an archaic form of Japanese that predated the galactic standard by millennia. The creature demanded to know what manner of shell the human was hiding in and promised to peel the metal away to reach the flesh beneath. Vader did not break stride. He simply raised his hand, and the demon was lifted from the ground by an invisible grip that tightened around its throat. The creature thrashed its eyes, widening in shock, as it clawed at the empty air, realizing too late that this was not a prey animal, but a predator of a different order. Vader observed the creature's physiology through the Force, noting the rapid cellular regeneration that attempted to heal the bruising on its neck, even as the cartilage was being crushed. This was a biological anomaly, a mutation that granted immortality at the cost of sanity, a crude imitation of the power the Sith sought through the Force. Vader clenched his fist and the demon's neck collapsed completely, the head twisting at an impossible angle. He dropped the body expecting it to lie still, but the creature merely twitched and began to reset its bones, the regeneration fueled by a dark energy that permeated its cells. The demon laughed a gargling wet sound and mocked the armored man, boasting that it could not be killed by mere physical trauma. Vader ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade snapping into existence with a hum that silenced the forest. He did not decapitate the creature immediately. Instead, he thrust the blade through the demon's chest, cauterizing the wound instantly and boiling the internal organs. The demon screamed a sound of genuine agony as the plasma energy, which burned at temperatures comparable to the core of a star, disrupted the cellular structure on a molecular level. Vader noted that the regeneration slowed significantly around the burn but did not stop entirely. This species was resilient. He withdrew the blade and with a fluid motion severed the creature's head and then bisected the torso. The pieces fell to the ground writhing. The head continued to speak, cursing him. Vader sensed the creature's fear of the coming dawn and deduced that solar radiation was the only absolute termination vector. He did not have the patience to wait for the sun. He extended his hand again and focused the force not to crush, but to disintegrate. He pulled at the very structure of the demon's biological cohesion, finding the anchor point of its mutation and ripping it apart. The demon exploded into a cloud of ash and fading embers, its consciousness extinguished not by the sun, but by a will that eclipsed it. Vader deactivated his weapon and continued his descent, leaving the pile of dust to be scattered by the wind. As he moved lower into the valley, the architecture of the human settlements became visible, small villages of wood and paper that looked pitifully flammable. He needed information, he needed a communication array, and he needed to establish a base of operations. The concept of diplomacy did not occur to him. He was a lord of the Sith, and the galaxy belonged to him by right of conquest, regardless of which dimension he currently occupied. He entered the first village, a cluster of thatched roof houses huddled near a river, just as a scream tore through the night. The village was under attack not by one demon, but by a pack of 3, led by a larger specimen with horns protruding from its forehead. The villagers were fleeing in panic, running blindly into the dark fields, while the demons tore through the paper walls of the homes, dragging children and elders out into the street. Vader watched the slaughter with dispassionate assessment. He had no interest in saving these primitives, but the chaos was inefficient and the noise was irritating. He stepped into the main dirt road, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the lead demon, who dropped the torso of a farmer and turned to face the new arrival. The demon sniffed the air and recoiled, confused by the scent of ozone and burnt machinery that clung to the black armor. Before the demon could attack, a blur of movement flashed from the rooftops. 2 figures clad in black uniforms with Hari jackets fluttering behind them descended with swords drawn. They were Demon Slayer's members of the Corps who had been tracking this pack for days. One wielded a blade that shimmered with the visual distortion of water, while the other struck with the heavy impact of stone. They moved with a speed that Vader acknowledged was enhanced well beyond the baseline human limits of this planet. They utilized a breathing technique that flooded their blood with oxygen, pushing their physical capabilities to a breaking point. Vader watched as the water user decapitated one of the lesser demons in a single fluid motion, while the stone user smashed the skull of another. It was a display of disciplined martial art that Vader might have respected, had it not been executed with such emotional desperation. The Slayers turned their attention to the lead demon, but paused when they saw Vader standing like a monolith in the center of the road. They assumed he was a new variety of demon, a mutated monstrosity encased in iron. The Water Slayer, a young man with eyes full of fear and duty, shouted a warning telling the civilian to flee. Vader did not move. The lead demon seized the moment of distraction and lunged at the Stone Slayer, its claws extending to impale the warrior. Vader intervened not out of charity, but to assert dominance. He did not use his lightsaber. He simply swiped his hand through the air, and the lead demon was blasted backward by a kinetic wave of force push that shattered the wooden front of the nearest house and buried the creature under a ton of debris. The two slayers froze, their combat instincts warring with their confusion. They had never seen a blood demon art that was invisible. They turned their blades toward Vader the Stone Slayer, shouting that this must be a powerful demon who had concealed his scent. Vader found their assessment tedious. He stepped forward, and the gravel crunched loudly under his boots. He demanded to know the location of the nearest planetary governor or military outpost. The Slayers did not understand the terminology, but they understood the tone of absolute authority, which they mistook for arrogance. The Stone Slayer charged, screaming a battle cry intended to focus his breathing, his sword swinging in a horizontal arc meant to cleave through the metal neck. Vader did not dodge. He caught the blade. His gloved hand, reinforced by the Force, stopped the Nichirin sword mid-swing. The metal groaned under the stress. The Slayer's eyes bulged in disbelief as he strained with all his might to complete the cut, but the black hand was immovable as a mountain. Vader twisted his wrist, and the steel snapped with a sharp report that echoed through the village. He backhanded the Slayer a blow that looked casual but carried enough force to shatter the warrior's ribcage and send him flying into the river 20 meters away. The Water Slayer screamed his comrade's name and unleashed a form of water breathing, moving in a flowing pattern that created the illusion of a whirlpool. He struck at Vader's joints, seeking a gap in the armor. Vader found the technique primitive. He tracked the boy's movement with the Force, anticipating the strike 3 seconds before it happened. When the sword came down, Vader sidestepped with a minimal economy of motion and seized the boy by the throat, lifting him into the air. The total concentration. Breathing ceased as the boy's windpipe was compressed. Vader held him there, staring into the terrified eyes, and telepathically rifled through the boy's surface thoughts, extracting language syntax, geographical data, and the hierarchy of this warrior order. He learned of the Hashira. He learned of Ubuyashiki. He learned of the weakness of the neck. He dropped the boy, who collapsed, gasping and retching on the ground. Vader informed him that his technique was sloppy, and his focus relied too heavily on emotion. He then turned to the pile of rubble where the lead demon was emerging, regenerating its broken limbs. The demon saw the power displayed and made a fatal error. It decided to submit to the stronger predator. It bowed, scraping its forehead on the ground, pledging loyalty to the new demon king. Vader ignited his lightsaber and removed the demon's head in a single stroke. He did not accept the loyalty of beasts. He looked at the surviving Slayer, who was crawling away, and ordered him to carry a message to his masters. The message was simple. The Empire has arrived. The crow that flew to the Ubuyashiki estate arrived just before dawn, its feathers ruffled and its voice trembling with a panic that birds should not possess. It did not recite the usual report of victory or defeat. It spoke of a void. Kagaya Ubuyashiki, the leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, sat on his veranda, his blind eyes turned toward the rising sun, listening to the birds' frantic cawing. The crow described a samurai of metal and darkness, who commanded invisible forces and wielded a sword of solid fire. It reported that this being had killed demons and slayers alike with equal indifference. Kagaya felt a chill that had nothing to do with his illness. His foresight, which often gave him vague impressions of the future, was silent regarding this entity. It was a blank spot in the tapestry of fate. He summoned his children and dictated urgent letters to the Hashira. This was not a demon, he was certain of that. Muzan Kibutsuji acted through fear and manipulation, hiding in the shadows. This new arrival had marched down the main road of a village and crushed everything in its path with the subtlety of a natural disaster. Kagaya sensed a shift in the wind. The delicate balance of their war, which had lasted for 1,000 years, had just been tipped over by an outside hand. He ordered the evacuation of the sector where the entity had appeared and commanded the wind and serpent Hashira to investigate but to not engage unless survival was impossible. He knew in his bones that his children were not ready for what was coming. Meanwhile, deep within the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji was pacing. He had seen through the eyes of the demon that Vader had killed. He had felt the crushing pressure of the Force and the burning heat of the plasma blade. For the first time in his existence, Muzan felt a pang of envy. The weapon the stranger carried did not rely on the sun, yet it burned like it. If he could obtain that technology or the biology of the creature inside the armor, perhaps he could conquer the sun without the blue spider lily. Muzan's narcissism blinded him to the danger. He saw Vader not as a conqueror, but as a resource to be harvested. He dispatched Akaza Upper Moon 3 with a simple command: bring the armor to the castle intact. Vader continued his march south, following the geography extracted from the Slayer's mind toward the capital city of Tokyo. He did not run, he did not rest. He walked with a relentless mechanical rhythm that ate up the miles. As the sun rose, he noted that the solar radiation was within standard parameters for a Class M planet. The demons vanished with the light, but the human presence increased. He encountered a patrol of military police near the outskirts of a larger town. They were armed with bolt-action rifles and sabers, primitive weapons that posed zero threat. They ordered him to halt, leveling their rifles. Vader did not break stride. They fired. The bullets flattened against the durasteel of his chest plate, falling to the ground like harmless hail. Vader extended his hand and yanked the rifles from their hands with the force, twisting the barrels into scrap metal before tossing them aside. The police fled, screaming that a monster was attacking. Vader ignored them. He was analyzing the infrastructure: steam trains, telegraph lines, electricity in the early stages of adoption. This world was backward, but it had raw materials. He could build a transmitter given enough time and slave labor. He needed a fortress. He saw a large estate on a hill surrounded by wisteria trees. The scent of the flowers was cloying, but the strategic position was acceptable. He approached the gate, which was guarded by 2 low-ranking demon slayers. They were shaking. They had heard the rumors spreading like wildfire down the valley. The black samurai was coming. Vader stopped at the gate. The wisteria did not repel him as it did the demons. He found the plant life irrelevant. He tore the heavy wooden gates off their hinges with a gesture exposing the courtyard within. Standing there waiting for him was not a cowering master, but a man with wild white hair and scars covering his body. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind, Hashira, had arrived earlier than ordered, driven by his own restless aggression. He stood with his sword drawn, his eyes manic with the anticipation of violence. He did not sense a demon's aura from Vader. He sensed a void, a black hole where a human spirit should be. Sanemi spat on the ground and asked if Vader was the one who had broken his subordinate's arm. Vader did not answer. He simply breathed that terrifying mechanical rasp amplified by the silence of the courtyard. Sanemi laughed a harsh barking sound and launched himself forward with the speed of a gale. Breath of wind. First form, dust whirlwind cutter. He moved faster than the eye could follow, a blur of steel aimed at Vader's neck. Vader's lightsaber ignited just in time to block the strike. The impact created a shockwave that cracked the paving stones. Sanemi's eyes widened. His blade had been stopped not by steel, but by a beam of energy that was heating his sword to a dangerous temperature. He leaped back instinctively, his instinct screaming that this opponent was different. Vader stood his ground, his two-handed grip on the saber unwavering. He told the Hashira that his speed was impressive for a primitive, but his technique lacked foresight. Sanemi growled and attacked again, unleashing a torrent of strikes form after form, creating a cyclone of slashing attacks that shredded the air around them. Vader parried every single one. He did not move his feet. He simply moved his blade with a precision that was mathematically perfect, blocking strikes that came from every angle. He was testing the Hashira. He wanted to see the limits of this biological overclocking. Sanemi was pushing his body to the limit, his veins bulging, his breathing ragged and furious. He realized with a dawning horror that the armored man was not even trying. Vader was toying with him. The injustice of it fueled Sanemi's rage. He screamed and unleashed his most powerful technique, Breath of Wind, 9th form, Idaten Typhoon. He leapt into the air, spinning his body to create a massive vertical tornado of cutting wind that tore up the earth and the trees as it descended on Vader. The attack was strong enough to level a building. Vader looked up. He saw the desperation in the attack. He decided to end the experiment. He released one hand from his saber and thrust his palm upward. The force slammed into the descending typhoon like a physical wall. The wind was scattered instantly, the kinetic energy neutralized by a barrier of pure will. Sanemi was caught in the backlash, suspended in mid-air by the force grip. Vader pulled him down, slamming him into the ground with enough force to crater the earth. Sanemi coughed blood, his sword falling from his hand. He tried to stand, but an invisible weight pressed him into the dirt. Vader walked over to him, the red blade humming by his side. He looked down at the broken Hashira. He told him that his courage was wasted on a lost cause. He prepared to deliver the killing blow to eliminate a potential insurgent leader. But before the blade could fall, a butterfly made of light fluttered across Vader's vision. A stinging sensation pricked at the exposed synth skin on his neck between the helmet and the shoulder guard. He paused. He sensed a chemical agent entering his bloodstream. A poison. He turned his head slowly. Standing on the roof of the estate was Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, her rapier dripping with a complex neurotoxin. She smiled a tight, dangerous smile and asked if the big metal man was feeling dizzy yet. Vader analyzed the toxin. It was potent, designed to liquefy demon cells. But he was not a demon, and his cybernetic systems were already filtering the foreign substance. The dark side burned through the pain, converting it into fuel. He turned fully toward her, his breathing unchanged. He told her that her chemistry was rudimentary. He reached out, and the roof of the estate collapsed under her feet, forcing her to jump into the courtyard. Now he faced two Hashira, and in the distance he could sense a third approaching with a burning spirit that felt like a star. Kyojuro Rengoku was coming. Vader tightened his grip on his saber. This world was resistant. Good. Resistance was the crucible in which order was forged. He stepped over Sanemi's prone body and advanced on the insect, Hashira, whose smile was faltering as she realized her poison had failed. The true war for Japan had begun not between slayers and demons, but between the laws of this world and the tyranny of the Empire. Vader intended to break the laws. He raised his blade, and the air around him began to distort from the heat and the sheer pressure of his presence. The ground beneath him cracked, spider-webbing outward as he drew deeply on the force, preparing to show these warriors the true meaning of power. The sky above darkened, responding to his will, as his conquest was written in the blood of the innocent and the brave alike. The technological disparity was vast, but the human spirit of the slayers was stubborn. It would need to be crushed thoroughly. Vader swung his blade and the courtyard was bathed in red light. The duel between the Sith Lord and the insect Hashira did not begin with the clash of steel, but with a terrifying silence that seemed to swallow the ambient noise of the surrounding forest. Shinobu Kocho moved with a velocity that defied the retina, leaving after images of purple and black fluttering across the courtyard like a glitch in reality. She was faster than the heavy armored figure, she was certain of that. Her strategy was predicated on speed and the delivery of lethal toxicology, a method that had felled demons 10 times her size. She lunged her rapier aimed at the gap in Vader's neck armor, a thrust calculated to pierce the soft tissue and inject 50 milligrams of wisteria-based neurotoxin directly into his jugular. But as her blade approached the target, the air itself betrayed her. Vader did not parry with his weapon, nor did he step aside. He simply exerted his will upon the space between them. The tip of her Nichirin blade stopped 3 inches from his throat, held fast by a barrier of compressed gravity that felt like striking a wall of invisible diamond. Shinobu's momentum, which should have carried her through the target, was arrested, instantly transferring the kinetic energy back into her own skeletal structure. Her wrist audibly cracked. She gasped, her eyes widening as she hung suspended in the air, her feet dangling inches off the ground, held by the throat of her own forward motion. Vader turned his helmet slightly, the red lenses regarding her with the clinical disinterest of an entomologist pinning a specimen. He noted the unique structure of her weapon, a stinger, rather than a blade designed for injection. He respected the ingenuity, but despised the weakness it implied. With a minute twitch of his finger, he twisted the force field. The steel of her rapier shattered, sending shards of metal flying like shrapnel. Shinobu was flung backward by a telekinetic shove that sent her tumbling across the gravel, her haori ripping as she skid to a halt near the unconscious body of Sanemi. She tried to stand, but the air pressure around her increased, pinning her to the earth. She was not fighting a warrior. She was fighting a disaster. Vader took a step toward her, his boots crushing the white pebbles. He intended to interrogate her regarding the chemical composition of her poison, which his suit's biosensors were still working to neutralize. But the interrogation was interrupted by the arrival of a star. The temperature in the courtyard spiked violently, rising 20 degrees in a split second. A roar like a blast furnace erupted from the gate, and a streak of crimson and gold fire tore through the twilight. Kyojuro Rengoku, the flame Hashira, had arrived. He did not pause to assess. He did not hesitate. He struck with the force of a falling meteor, breath of flame, burst form, unknowing fire. The attack was a singular horizontal slash of such speed and power that the friction ignited the air around the blade, creating a terrifying arc of flame aimed at Vader's torso. Vader sensed the heat before the strike. He pivoted his lightsaber, moving in a blurred arc to intercept the Nichirin blade. When the two weapons met, the sound was not a clang, but a thunderclap that shattered the windows of the estate. Plasma met solar-charged steel. The heat of Rengoku's spirit clashed with the cold void of the dark side. For a moment, the two warriors stood locked in a stalemate, the ground beneath them liquefying into glass from the sheer thermal energy being released. Rengoku smiled, his eyes burning with an intense, unwavering determination. He shouted his admiration for the stranger's strength, demanding to know why a man of such power would terrorize the innocent. Vader did not answer with words. He pushed. The physical strength of the cyborg, amplified by the force, overwhelmed the Hashira. Rengoku was slid backward, his feet carving deep trenches in the molten earth. Vader broke the lock and swung a downward strike. Rengoku parried breath of flame, second form rising scorching sun. He deflected the plasma blade upwards, saving himself from bifurcation, but the heat of the lightsaber singed his eyebrows and scorched his haori. Rengoku realized instantly that his opponent's weapon was superior. It cut through resistance without drag. If it touched his flesh, the wound would be catastrophic. The flame Hashira leapt back, creating distance, his chest heaving as he cycled his breathing to purge the fear from his blood. He was joined by Shinobu, who had managed to crawl to her feet, clutching her broken wrist. They stood together, the butterfly and the flame, facing the black monolith. Vader deactivated his lightsaber for a moment, the hum dying down, plunging the courtyard back into silence. He told them that their breathing techniques were an interesting adaptation of biological limitations, but ultimately futile against the power of the Force. He raised his hand, and a heavy stone lantern from the garden rose into the air, hovering ominously. He was demonstrating that he did not need to touch them to kill them. Before the Slayers could coordinate their next move, the sensory environment shifted again. The air grew cold, and the smell of ozone was replaced by the scent of pine needles and blood. A presence arrived that made the hairs on Rengoku's neck stand up. It was not a savior. From the roof of the main hall, a figure dropped silently, landing in a crouch between the Slayers and Vader. It was Akaza, upper rank 3. The demon's skin was marked with blue tattoos, and his eyes glowed with the yellow malice of the hells. He ignored Rengoku. He ignored Shinobu. His entire attention was fixed on Vader. Akaza's compass needle, his blood demon art that allowed him to sense the fighting spirit of his opponents, was screaming in confusion. When he looked at Rengoku, he saw a blazing fire of battle spirit. But when he looked at Vader, he saw nothing. No drive, no anger, no joy. Just a black hole in the fabric of the world. It was a sensation Akaza had never felt in centuries of combat. He was intrigued. He was delighted. He asked Vader if he was a human or a construct of iron. He invited him to become a demon to preserve that magnificent strength for eternity. Vader looked at the demon. He felt the creature's chaotic energy, the chaotic mix of martial discipline and cannibalistic hunger. He found it repulsive. He reignited his lightsaber, the red blade casting long shadows against Akaza's pale skin. He told the demon that he had no interest in bargaining with a parasite. Akaza smiled, exposing his fangs. He launched himself at Vader, moving with a speed that eclipsed even the Slayers. Destructive death compass needle. He struck with a flurry of punches, each one generating a shockwave capable of pulverizing rock. Vader did not block them all. He took a punch to the chest plate. The durasteel dented. The impact drove the breath from his lungs, but he did not falter. He swung the lightsaber. Akaza dodged by a hair's breadth, the plasma singing his eyelashes. The demon laughed, enjoying the dance. He struck again, a kick aimed at Vader's head. Vader caught the ankle. The metal glove clamped down like a vice. Akaza's eyes widened. He tried to pull away, but the grip was absolute. Vader brought the lightsaber down, chopping through the demon's thigh. The leg was severed. Akaza screamed, not in pain, but in shock, as the wound sizzled and smoked, refusing to regenerate immediately. The intense heat of the plasma had cauterized the cells sealing the demon blood vessels and confusing the regenerative biology. Akaza punched Vader in the faceplate, forcing the Sith Lord to release his grip. The demon backflipped away, landing on one leg, looking down at the stump of his thigh. It was healing, but slowly, too slowly. Akaza realized that this weapon was a threat to his immortality. The Slayers watched in stunned silence. A human was dismantling an upper-rank demon. Rengoku saw the opportunity. He signaled Shinobu. They would attack while the monsters were distracted. Rengoku surged forward, breath of flame, fifth form flame tiger. A massive tiger made of fire roared into existence, charging at Akaza. Shinobu flanked, throwing a barrage of kunai coated in poison at Vader's exposed joints. The battlefield descended into absolute chaos. Vader deflected the kunai with a wave of his hand, sending them embedding into the wooden pillars of the estate. He then turned his attention to the flame tiger. He did not block it. He absorbed it. He held out his hand and used Tudamini's the energy absorption technique to dissipate the heat and kinetic energy of the attack. The flames vanished into his palm, leaving Rengoku staring in shock. Vader then clenched his fist and unleashed a force repulse. A spherical wave of pure kinetic energy exploded outward from his body. It hit Akaza. It hit Rengoku. It hit Shinobu. It hit the estate itself. The walls of the manor blew outward. The roof collapsed. The wisteria trees which had stood for 100 years were uprooted and shredded. The courtyard was instantly transformed into a crater. Akaza was blown into the forest, his body broken by the impact. Rengoku shielded Shinobu, taking the brunt of the blast, his body skidding across the dirt, his bones creaking under the pressure. The dust settled slowly, revealing a scene of devastation. The sanctuary was gone. The safe haven of the Demon Slayer Corps had been erased from the map. Vader stood in the center of the ruin, his cape untouched by the dust. He was done playing. He walked toward Rengoku, who was struggling to stand blood pouring from a wound on his forehead. Vader admired the man's tenacity. In another life, he would have made an excellent inquisitor. But in this life was an obstacle. Vader reached out with the force and gripped Rengoku by the throat, lifting him into the air. Rengoku clawed at the invisible hand, his legs kicking. Shinobu screamed, trying to rise, but her body was broken. Vader looked to Rengoku's eyes. He told him that his duty was a shackle and his protection of the weak was a vanity that merely prolonged their suffering. He began to squeeze. The sound of cartilage straining was audible in the silence. Rengoku's vision began to blur. He saw his mother's face. He smiled. He plunged his sword into the ground, anchoring himself even as he was choked. He would not die without a cost. He swung his legs up, catching Vader's helmet between his boots, and twisted, using the last of his strength to wrench the Sith Lord's neck. The servos in Vader's neck armor whined. The seal of the helmet hissed. Vader stumbled, dropping Rengoku. The Hashira fell, gasping for air. Vader adjusted his helmet, checking the seal integrity. It was holding, but barely. He was annoyed. Suddenly, the shadows of the forest elongated. Akaza had returned. He was healed, his leg fully regrown. But he was not attacking. He was watching from the tree line, his eyes narrowed. He had received a telepathic command from Muzan. Observe. Do not engage further. The weapon is the priority. Akaza hated the order. He wanted to fight, but he obeyed. He faded into the darkness, leaving the Slayers to their fate. Vader sensed the demons retreat. He dismissed it. He turned back to the Slayers. He had destroyed their base. He had broken their strongest warriors. He needed a resource. He looked at Shinobu. Her mind contained the knowledge of this world's biology, the secrets of the demons and the flowers. She was valuable. Rengoku was merely a soldier. Vader made a calculation. He walked over to Shinobu, who was trying to drag herself toward her fallen sword. He stepped on the blade, snapping it. He reached down and grabbed her by the back of her uniform, lifting her like a doll. She struck at him with her good hand, but he ignored it. He turned to Rengoku, who was trying to stand again using his sword as a crutch. Vader told the flame Hashira to carry a message to his master. He told him that the mountains now belonged to the Empire. If the Slayers wanted to survive, they would submit. If they resisted, they would be exterminated. Vader turned and walked away, carrying the insect, Hashira, into the darkness of the forest. Rengoku tried to follow. He took one step and collapsed his body, finally shutting down, from the internal injuries caused by the force repulse. He lay in the ruins of the Wisteria estate, listening to the fading sound of the mechanical breathing as the monster took one of their own. The catastrophe was total. The illusion of safety was shattered. The demons were no longer the only nightmare in the dark. High above, in the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji sat on his throne, his fingers steepled. He had watched the battle through the eyes of his spies. He saw the destruction of the Wisteria estate, a feat that even his upper moons found difficult due to the poisonous flowers. This metal man walked through the poison as if it were air. Muzan smiled, a cold, cruel curving of his lips. He did not care about the slayers. He cared about the power to defy biology. He ordered the upper moons to assemble. The game had changed. He would not hunt the slayers anymore. He would hunt the machine. Vader marched through the night, his prisoner silenced by a precise nerve pinch. He did not stop until he reached a cavern high in the mountains, a location he had scouted earlier. It was defensible. It was cold. He threw Shobu into the corner of the cave. She hit the rock wall and slumped over unconscious. Vader sat on a stone slab and engaged his meditation trance. He needed to repair the damage to his suit. He needed to calibrate his sensors. But mostly, he needed to listen to the Force. This world was loud. The spirits of the dead lingered here, bound by regret and unfinished duty. It was a chaotic clamor that distracted him. He reached out with his mind and began to impose order on the chaos. He visualized the galaxy he had left behind, the cold, rigid structure of the Empire. He would recreate it here. He would build a new order. He would take the breathing techniques of the Slayers and the blood arts of the demons, and he would forge them into a weapon to tear a hole back to his own reality. Or if that failed, he would rule this one. The sun began to rise over the mountains, illuminating the smoke rising from the ruins of the estate below. The age of slayers was over. The age of the Empire had begun. In the headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps, a bell tolled. It was the bell of mourning, but also of emergency. Kagaya Ubuyashiki coughed blood into a handkerchief, his illness aggravated by the psychic shock of the night's events. His crow had returned with a report. Sanemi was alive but broken. Rengoku was critical. Shinobu was taken. The Wisteria estate, the primary manufacturing center for their poisons and medicines, was gone. The supply chain was severed. The morale of the Corps was fractured. Kagaya looked out at the garden, where his children played. He knew that the war they had fought for 1,000 years had just become a skirmish in a much larger conflict. He needed allies. He needed to break the ancient laws. He summoned the stone Hashira Gyome Himejima. He told the giant blind warrior that they had to do the unthinkable. They had to open the archives of the Sengoku era. They had to find the forbidden techniques, and they had to find the demon Tamayo. If they were to fight a monster from beyond the stars, they would need the help of a monster from within. The desperate alliance was born not out of hope, but out of the sheer terrifying necessity of survival. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out from the mountains like the fingers of a black glove closing around the throat of Japan. The catastrophic shift had occurred, and there was no going back. The timeline had branched, and it was bleeding. The darkness inside the cavern was not merely the absence of light, but a heavy, suffocating blanket of oppression that radiated from the black-armored figure sitting on the makeshift throne of carved stone. Shinobu Kocho hung from the ceiling, her wrists bound by a cable of high-tensile wire that Vader had spooled from his utility belt, a material that no knife in this era could cut and no escape artist could slip. She was conscious, but her body was a map of dull aches and sharp, stinging pains where her ribs had been bruised by the telekinetic impact. She watched the monster work. Vader had not spoken to her in hours. He was focused entirely on the fragments of the Nichirin blades he had collected from the battlefield. He held a shard of blue ore in his gloved hand, applying the intense heat of a fusion cutter he had engaged from a hidden compartment in his gauntlet. The flame hissed a microscopic needle of blue fire that should have melted the steel instantly, but the ore resisted. It glowed, it hummed, and it changed color, shifting from blue to a dull, angry red before cooling back to its original state. Vader paused the mechanical breathing, cycling with a rhythm that Shinobu found hypnotic and terrifying. He was analyzing the metallurgy. He had discovered that the metal was not just iron and carbon, but a lattice of mineral structures capable of storing solar radiation. It was a battery. To a Sith Lord, this was a revelation. The Slayers were not fighting with swords. They were fighting with solid light. Vader found the concept elegant, but the execution primitive. He turned his helmet toward Shinobu, the red lenses glowing in the dim light of the cave. He asked her about the source of the ore. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated in her chest cavity, bypassing her ears to resonate directly in her bones. Shinobu refused to answer, spitting a mixture of blood and saliva onto the stone floor. She told him that he could kill her, but he would never find the village. Vader did not react with anger. He stood up, and the shadows in the cave seemed to stretch and grasp at his cape. He told her that her cooperation was irrelevant, because her mind was already open to him. He stepped closer, and Shinobu felt a cold, invisible probe entering her thoughts. Not a blunt force like before, but a surgical insertion that sifted through her memories. He saw the mountain. He saw the masked villagers. He saw the forges. He saw the location of the Swordsmith village. Shinobu screamed not from pain, but from the violation, trying to erect mental walls, trying to recite the names of poisons, trying to hide the secret. But the force swept through her defenses like a storm surge through a paper house. Vader withdrew the probe, leaving her gasping and shivering. He had what he needed, but he did not leave immediately. He picked up the broken hilt of Rengoku's sword, the flame guard cracked and scorched. He told Shinobu that her order fought with the desperation of those who knew they were obsolete. He claimed that their reliance on the sun was a weakness, because the sun eventually set. The dark side, he explained, was eternal. He ignited his lightsaber and brought the plasma blade down on the Nichirin shard. This time he poured his hate into the crystal of his own weapon, willing the synthetic kyber to dominate the natural ore. The cave was illuminated by a blinding flash as the two energies warred. The Nichirin shard shattered, exploding into dust, but not before turning a deep, violent crimson. Vader swept the dust into a container. He was beginning to understand how to corrupt this world's light. Far to the south, in the hidden headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps, the atmosphere was one of funeral solemnity. The surviving Hashira stood in the courtyard of the Ubuyashiki estate, their heads bowed. Gyome Himejima, the stone Hashira, towered over the others, his prayer beads clicking softly as he chanted a sutra for the lost stability of their world. Beside him, Sanemi Shinazugawa leaned heavily on a crutch, his chest bandaged, his face twisted in a rictus of suppressed rage. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run back to the mountains and die fighting the metal man, but his body refused to obey. Giyu Tomioka stood apart, his eyes distant, focused on a reality that only he could see. They were waiting. The master, Kagaya Ubuyashiki, had summoned against a violation of the Corps' most sacred law. The gate opened and a woman in a kimono stepped through, accompanied by a young man with hair that shifted green in the light. Tamayo and Yushiro. The presence of demons in the headquarters caused the Hashira to tense their hands, instinctively reaching for weapons that were not there or were broken. Sanemi growled a low animalistic sound, but Gyome silenced him with a single heavy hand on the shoulder. Kagaya spoke from the veranda, his voice weak, but carrying the absolute authority of a father. He explained that the enemy they faced was not of this world. He described Vader not as a demon, but as a warlord, from the stars a being who conquered planets and extinguished civilizations. The information had come from the crow that had observed the battle and from the strange psychic residue Vader had left on the land, which Kagaya's heightened senses could interpret as a narrative of war and genocide. Tamayo looked at the Hashira, her eyes filled with a sad wisdom. She told them that she had sensed the disturbance in the biological fabric of the region. The creature did not function on blood or cell division. It functioned on a form of energy that consumed life to sustain itself. It was a cancer in the shape of a man. She offered her assistance not out of charity, but out of fear. If Vader conquered Japan, he would not tolerate demons any more than he tolerated humans. He would wipe them all out or worse, enslave them. The alliance was struck. It was the Pact of Ash. Tamayo would work with the few surviving scientists of the core to analyze the samples of soil and air taken from Vader's impact site, hoping to find a toxin or a weakness in his life support system. The Hashira would focus on buying time. They needed to unlock the marks. They needed to access the transparent world. Gyome stated that if physical force could not move the Iron Man, then they must strike at the spirit within. They had to assume he had a soul, and if he had a soul, it could be severed. While the Slayers plotted their desperate defense, Vader was already putting his own plans into motion. He did not march toward the capital. He marched toward the source of the metal. He moved through the forest with a terrifying speed for a man of his bulk, using the force to propel himself across ravines and up cliff faces. He carried Shinobu slung over his shoulder like a sack of grain, a living hostage to ensure the Slayers would hesitate. But he was not alone. The woods were watching him. Muzan Kibutsuji had decided to test the intruder. He did not send the upper moons again. He wanted to see how Vader dealt with the abstract. He sent Enmu lower rank 1, the demon of dreams. Vader heard the sound of a train whistle echoing through the valley, a phantom sound, because there were no tracks here. The mist thickened, swirling around his boots, smelling of soot and old tickets. Vader stopped. His sensors indicated a rapid drop in temperature and a spike in hallucinogenic spores into the air. A voice whispered in his ear, soft and androgynous, promising him rest, promising him a world where the suit was gone, where his lungs were pink and healthy, where a woman with flowers in her hair was waiting for him on a balcony in Naboo. Vader stood motionless in the clearing. The mist coalesced into the form of Enmu, who stood atop a tree branch, bowing theatrically. The demon apologized for the interruption, but insisted that the great lord looked tired. He offered Vader a ticket to a dream where he had not killed her, where the children were alive, where the galaxy was at peace. It was a potent trap. Enmu's blood demon art was absolute against humans. Everyone had regrets. Everyone had a breaking point. Vader stood there, and for a moment the mechanical breathing hitched. The image of Padme shimmered in the mist, reaching out a hand. Her eyes were full of love, not the fear he had seen at the end. It was perfect. It was everything he wanted. And that was why he knew it was a lie. Vader did not desire peace. He did not desire forgiveness. He lived for the pain. The pain was the engine that drove the machine. To take away the pain was to kill him. He focused on the image of Padme, and he strangled it in his mind. He poured his self-loathing, his guilt, and his infinite rage into the mental construct, turning the dream of Naboo into a nightmare of Mustafa. The fire rose, the lava bubbled, the flesh burned. Enmu on the branch gasped, clutching his head. He had made a fatal error. He had connected his consciousness to Vader's to drag him into the dream. But he had opened a door to a mind that was a black hole of suffering. The feedback loop was instantaneous. Enmu screamed as his own mind was flooded with the psychic weight of 40 years of slaughter, of the burning of the Jedi Temple, of the torture of thousands of dissidents. The demon fell from the tree, writhing on the ground, blood pouring from his eyes and ears. He had tried to trap a nightmare in a dream, and the nightmare had eaten him. Vader stepped forward, the mist evaporating around him, terrified by his presence. He looked down at the sobbing demon. He told Enmu that his visions were petty. He raised his boot and crushed the demon's head, ending the lower moon's existence without ever igniting his saber. The mental assault had failed. The psychological profile of the Sith Lord was a fortress built on the bedrock of absolute trauma. There was no crack for the demons to exploit, because the entire structure was made of broken things held together by will. Vader continued his ascent. He reached the perimeter of the Swordsmith village by nightfall. The village was hidden behind complex illusions and geographical barriers that had confused demons for centuries, but Vader simply followed the magnetic signature of the ore. He walked through the illusion barriers, shattering the genjutsu-like seals with pulses of force energy that disrupted the delicate spiritual arrangements. The alarm bells began to ring. The villagers, wearing their Hyotoko masks, scrambled to hide the forges to bury the steel. But it was too late. Vader entered the village square. He did not kill indiscriminately. He needed labor. He amplified his voice, commanding the village to cease all production of Nichirin blades and to begin the fabrication of durasteel alloy plating, based on the schematics he was transmitting to their local primitive cogitators. The village chief, a small man shaking with terror, stepped forward, brandishing a hammer. He shouted that they would never forge weapons for a monster. Vader admired the defiance. He ignited his lightsaber and sliced the hammer in half. He then lifted the chief into the air, choking him. He told the villagers that for every hour of production lost, one smith would die. He threw the chief aside. The work began. The Swordsmith village, a sanctuary of art and tradition, was converted overnight into a labor camp for the Empire. The smoke from the chimneys changed from the white puffs of charcoal to the thick black smog of industrial refinement. Vader stood in the center of the village, watching the sparks fly. He was building a subspace transmitter. He would contact the fleet. He would bring the Star Destroyers to this world and burn the forests until only order remained. But the Slayers were not idle. They had tracked him, and they had brought help. The attack came at midnight. It did not come with a shout, but with the earth shaking. Gaomei Himejima had arrived. The blind giant swung his massive flail and axed the spiked iron ball, smashing into the newly constructed smelting furnace, destroying Vader's progress in a single blow. The explosion of molten metal lit up the night. Vader turned his cape swirling. He saw the giant monk standing amidst the flames, weeping tears of stone-cold resolve. And behind him, the other Hashira, Mitsuri Kanroji, the love, Hashira, her flexible sword whipping through the air. Obanai Iguro, the serpent. Hashira, his eyes different colors focused on Vader's joints. And Gyu Tomioka, The water Hashira, calm and deadly. They had unlocked their marks. The patterns of flame and water and stone appeared on their skin, boosting their physical stats to the absolute limit of human potential. They moved as a unit, a perfect coordination of elements. Gaome attacked from the front the flail, creating a zone of death that Vader had to respect. Mitsuri flanked her sword, bending at impossible angles to strike around Vader's guard. Obanai slid through the shadows, targeting the life support panel. Giyu flowed like water, filling the gaps in Vader's defense. It was a raid of legendary proportions. Vader found himself pressed. He deflected the flail with a two-handed block, his boot sliding backward on the dirt. He ducked under the whipsword, the plasma of his saber hissing as it grazed the steel. He caught the serpent sword with the force pushing Obanai away, but they were relentless. They were faster than before, stronger. The marks were drawing on their life force, burning their years away for moments of power. Vader recognized the technique. It was similar to the force rage he utilized but biologically internalized. He respected it. He decided to escalate. Vader reached into the force and seized the flames from the burning furnace. He did not just manipulate them, he corrupted them. He mixed the fire with the dark side, creating a storm of black and red hellfire that he unleashed in a radial wave. Pyrokinesis. The Slayers scattered the heat, singing their uniforms. Gaome stood his ground, spinning his beads to create a barrier of rapid motion, but the fire was too intense. It burned his skin. Vader capitalized on the separation. He launched himself at Giyu. The water Hashira engaged Breath of Water 11th form Dead Calm. The air around him stilled. The attack should have been nullified. But Vader's blade was not a physical wave. It was a beam of energy. It crashed into the Dead Calm and shattered it. Giyu was thrown back his sword arm. Burned. Vader turned to Mitsuri. She shrieked, attacking with a flurry of strikes. Vader caught the whipsword in his hand, the cortosis weave of his glove, resisting the cut for a split second long enough for him to yank her forward. He headbutted her, the durasteel helmet impacting her forehead. She crumpled. Gyome roared and brought the axe down. Vader caught the handle. The ground beneath them collapsed into a crater. The contest of strength was Titan against machine. Gyome's muscles bulged, the mark on his arms glowing bright red. Vader's servos whined, the force reinforcing his skeletal structure. Vader told the monk that his faith was heavy, but the dark side was weightless. He twisted the axe handle, snapping the chain. Her force pushed Gyome with a blast that sent the giant crashing through 3 buildings. The raid was failing, but it was a distraction. While the Hashira fought, a shadow moved through the village. It was a young boy with a scar on his forehead and a box on his back. Tangiro Kamado. He was not there to fight Vader. He was there to rescue Shinobu. He found her in the hut Vader had commandeered. She was weak, unable to walk. Tanjiro smelled the scent of the metal man everywhere, a scent of burnt circuitry and old hate. It made him want to vomit. He cut Shinobu's bonds. She whispered that they had to run, that Vader was unbeatable. Tanjiro shook his head. He said that no one was unbeatable. He hoisted her onto his back. He ran. He used the chaos of the battle to slip away into the forest. But Vader sensed it. He sensed the movement of the prisoner. He broke off the engagement with the Hashira, flinging Obanai aside like a rag doll. He turned toward the fleeing boy. He raised his hand to crush them from a distance. Suddenly, a biplane flew over the village, flying dangerously low. It was a primitive craft, barely airworthy. Leaning out of the cockpit was a young man with a mohawk, holding a shotgun. Genya Shinazugawa. He fired. The shells were not filled with the lead. They were filled with explosive rounds derived from the blood of high-ranking demons that Tamayo had synthesized. The rounds exploded against Vader's helmet, blinding his senses with a sticky, corrosive red mist. Vader roared, swiping at the plane with his saber, slicing the landing gear off. The plane wobbled, but pulled up. The distraction worked. Tangiro disappeared into the trees. The Hashira, seeing the objective was complete, retreated. They grabbed their wounded and vanished into the night using smoke bombs and the cover of the burning village. Vader stood alone in the ruins of the Swordsmith village. He was covered in ash and demon blood. His prisoner was gone. His furnace was destroyed. The slayers had bloodied his nose. Vader did not rage. He stood in silence. The mechanical breathing cycled. He wiped the corrosive blood from his lenses. The slayers had evolved. They had learned to use combined arms tactics. They had learned to sacrifice. They had learned to use his own arrogance against him. Good. He looked at the fleeing backs of the Hashira. He did not pursue. He had something else. During the fight, he had analyzed the frequency of the mark. He had analyzed the way they drew power from their emotions. He picked up a discarded Nichirin sword, one that had been dropped by a fleeing smith. He held it in his hand. He focused. He did not try to break it this time. He tried to breathe through it. He channeled the force into the blade, simulating the total concentration breathing he had witnessed. The blade turned black, pitch black, darker than the night. And then it began to scream, a high-pitched keen like a dying star. Vader swung the sword. A wave of black energy, a crescent of pure void, tore through the remaining buildings, slicing them cleanly in half. It was a new form. Breath of the Sith first form void slash. He had assimilated their power system. He had improved it. He threw the sword aside. It was brittle. It shattered after one strike. The metal of this world was too weak for his power. He needed to forge his own. He looked at the trembling swordsmiths who remained. He ordered them to rebuild the furnace. He told them that they would not be making a transmitter anymore. They would be making armor. They would be making a suit capable of withstanding the full power of the Force. And they would be making a new lightsaber hilt, one forged from the strongest ore in the mountain, tempered in the blood of the demons he had killed. Muzan watched from the shadows of the Infinity Castle. He was no longer smiling. The defeat of Enmu was expected, but the adaptation, the way Vader had turned the Slayer's own tactics against them, the way he had corrupted the Nichirin, Muzan felt a tremor of genuine existential dread. He realized that if Vader was not stopped, he would consume everything. The Demon King made a decision. He would not wait for the Slayers to fail. He would mobilize the upper moons, all of them, Kokushibo, Doma, Akaza, Hantengu, Gyoko, Daki, and Gyutaro. He would unleash the parade of 100 demons. He would drown the metal man in bodies, and he would do it while the Slayers were licking their wounds. The chaotic free-for-all was over. The war for the planet had entered its total phase. The sound of hammers striking steel in the village and the sound of biwa strings twanging in the castle, signaling the mobilization of the apocalypse. The systemic clash was complete. Now only the war of extermination remained. The moon hung low over the mountains, red and swollen, as if gorged on the violence to come. Vader returned to his throne of stone and waited. He knew they were coming. He was counting on it. The fires of the Swordsmith village had burned for 3 days and 3 nights without cessation. A timeline that defied the physical stamina of the human laborers, but was enforced by a will that allowed no fatigue. The village, hidden for centuries in the mist, was now a factory of the dark side, a brutalist cathedral of industry, where the rhythmic clang of hammers on crimson ore set the tempo for a ritual that was as much metallurgical as it was alchemical. Darth Vader stood before the central forge. his armor coated in a layer of soot that dulled the shine of the durasteel, but somehow made his presence heavier, more elemental. He held in his hand the new hilt he had constructed, a jagged, angular thing forged from the core of a meteorite that had been worshipped by the locals as a star god. Into this hilt, he had inserted the corrupted red crystal he had created from the Slayers, or a synthetic kyber analog that pulsated with a hunger the original Jedi crystals never possessed. This was not merely a weapon repair, it was an evolution. Vader had realized that the solar energy stored in the Nichirin metal could be inverted. Instead of absorbing sunlight to kill demons, he had aligned the molecular lattice to absorb the ambient life force of the forest and channel it into a beam of coherent destructive energy. He was weaponizing the very ecosystem of Japan against itself. The smiths worked with bleeding hands, their eyes wide with the terror of men who were crafting the instrument of their own apocalypse. Vader did not care for their fear, only their precision. He sensed the approach of the enemy long before the first warning bell tolled. The air pressure in the valley dropped a sudden vacuum that sucked the sound out of the world. The birds fell silent. The insects ceased their chirping. The darkness of the surrounding forest seemed to liquefy, rolling toward the village like a tidal wave of ink. Muzan Kibutsuji had arrived, and he had not come to bargain. He had brought the night with him. The assault began not with a scream, but with a dimensional distortion. The space around the village perimeter warped, and from the shadows emerged the upper moons. It was a deployment of force that the Demon Slayer Corps had never witnessed in its history, a gathering of apex predators that was theoretically impossible due to their territorial nature. But the fear of the Metal Man had overridden their hatred for one another. Gyoko Upper Rank 5 appeared first, emerging from a porcelain pot that materialized on the roof of the forge. He giggled, a sound like wet glass rubbing together, and unleashed a torrent of fish-like abominations that swam through the air spewing acidic needles. Vader did not turn. He simply extended his left hand, and the air around the forge solidified. The fish slammed into an invisible barrier, exploding into puddles of acid that hissed harmlessly against the force shield. Vader crushed the pot with a thought, imploding the ceramic vessel and forcing the demon to teleport to another jar, screaming in annoyance. Hunting Upper Rank 4 cowered behind a rock, weeping, creating his clones the manifestations of anger, pleasure, sorrow, and joy, which immediately launched a coordinated elemental attack. Lightning struck from the sky. Sonic waves tore up the earth and spears of wind battered the shield. Vader found the cacophony irritating. He finally turned his new lightsaber igniting with a sound that was deeper and angrier than before, a roar of unstable plasma that bled black smoke at the edges. He swept the blade in a wide arc, and the shockwave alone shattered the sound waves and dispersed the lightning. He marched forward, stepping out of the forge, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was walking into an army of nightmares, and he looked like a man walking to execute a prisoner. From the tree lined the lower-ranking demons, the scrap meat of Muzan's army flooded the village by the hundreds. They were cannon fodder meant to exhaust the Slayers, but against Vader, they were simply biomass to be harvested. He waded into the horde using Form 5 degem, so his blade, moving in tight aggressive blocks and counters, that redirected the demon's own strength against them. He did not just cut, he obliterated. The new blade's inverted Nichirin energy did not just burn it necroticized. Every demon struck by the weapon did not regenerate. The wounds turned grey and crumbled to ash. The regeneration factor halted by the dark side's negation of life. It was a massacre, but the upper moons were the true threat. Doma Upper Rank 2 descended from the sky, a fan in his hand, a serene smile on his face. He scattered a cloud of frozen lotus petals, creating a zone of absolute zero temperature that would have frozen the lungs of any Slayer instantly. Vader's life support systems flashed a critical warning as the external temperature plummeted to levels seen only in the void of space. The suit's heaters kicked into overdrive, draining his power reserves. Doma laughed, asking if the metal man felt the chill of the grave. Vader did not reply. He focused his rage. The cold was familiar. The cold was his friend. He drew upon the memory of the carbon freezing chamber on Bespin, the memory of the cold vacuum between stars. He accepted the cold, and then he commanded it to cease. He used the force to vibrate the molecules of the air around him, generating kinetic heat that pushed back the frost. He reached out and gripped Doma not by the throat, but by the ice itself. He shattered the frozen cloud, sending shards of ice flying back at the demon with the velocity of bullets. Doma's smile faltered as a shard of his own magic pierced his eye. This opponent did not play by the rules of biology or elements. He played by the rules of dominance. The battle escalated into a cataclysm. The village was being leveled. Buildings were reduced to splinters, the forges smashed. But amidst the chaos, a duel of silence was beginning. Kokushibo Upper Rank 1 stepped onto the main street. He carried a sword made of his own flesh, covered in eyes. He breathed the moon-breathing first-form Dark Moon Evening Palace. A flurry of chaotic crescent blades slashed through the air, cutting indiscriminately through demons and buildings alike. Vader sensed the precision, the centuries of discipline, the twisted code of honor. This was the mirror image he had been waiting for. A fallen samurai, a warrior who had traded his humanity for power. Vader stopped his advance on Doma and turned to face Kokushibo. The two stood across the ruin of the town square. 6 eyes met 2 red lenses. Kokushibo spoke, his voice dry as old parchment, praising Vader's swordsmanship, but condemning his lack of elegance. He claimed that technique born of machines could never surpass technique born of flesh. Vader ignited his saber, holding it in a one-handed guard, the tip pointed at the ground. He told the demon that his flesh was a crutch, and his breathing was a desperate attempt to mimic the power of the universe. They clashed. The sound was deafening. Moon breathing created erratic, unpredictable slashes that changed length and direction mid-swing. Vader's precognition was pushed to its limit. He parried strikes that appeared out of nowhere, relying on the force to guide his hand where his eyes could not see. Sparks of red and purple lit up the night. Kokushibo was faster than Yoda, faster than anyone Vader had fought in this galaxy. But he was predictable in his unpredictability. He relied on the eyes on his sword to see the openings. Vader closed his eyes. He surrendered to the Force, letting the dark side flow through him like a conduit. He stopped fighting the sword and started fighting the intent. He ducked under a crescent moon slash and thrust his hand forward. Force push, but concentrated. A telekinetic spear aimed directly at Kokushibo's solar plexus. The impact launched the Upper Rank 1 backwards, smashing him through the remains of the chief's house. Kokushibo recovered instantly, his regeneration knitting his broken ribs, but he was shaken. He had been touched. He had been moved. While the Titans fought, the Demon Slayers arrived. They did not charge in blindly. They had learned. Tangiro, Kamado, Nezuko, Zenitsu, and Inosuke, along with the remaining Hashira, had positioned themselves on the ridges overlooking the valley. They saw the hellscape below. They saw Vader holding off the entire Upper Moon hierarchy. It was a scene that defied logic. Zenitsu was weeping, terrified by the sheer volume of sound the battle was generating. Inosuke was trembling not with fear, but with a confused instinct that told him there was no prey down there, only death. Tangiro used his heightened sense of smell to analyze the battlefield. He smelled the ozone of the lightsaber, the rot of the demons, and something else. A tear, a rib in the smell of the world itself. Vader was not just fighting, he was gathering energy. Every demon he killed, every release of energy, was being funneled toward the center of the village where the ruined forge stood. He was building a singularity. Tanjiro realized with a jolt of horror that Vader intended to overload the ley lines of the mountain. He wasn't trying to win the battle. He was trying to use the death of the demons as a battery to punch a hole in the sky. Vader felt the culmination approaching. The upper moons were tiring. Their regeneration was slowing down as the dark side suppressed the ambient spiritual energy they relied on. He had them. He raised his left hand, and the debris of the village began to rise. Stones, timbers, broken swords, and the bodies of dead demons lifted into the air, swirling in a massive cyclone around him. He was creating a vortex. He reached out with his mind and seized Hunteng, the cowering upper rank 4. The demon screamed as he was pulled into the center of the storm. Vader did not cut him. He drained him. He used force drain, a technique forbidden by the Jedi, used only by the most ancient Sith, to siphon the life essence of the demon directly into his own reserves. Hanteng shriveled his immortality, failing against a hunger that was metaphysical. The demon crumbled into dust, his centuries of accumulated power absorbed by Vader. The surge of energy was intoxicating. Vader's suit systems flared to 120% efficiency. His pain vanished. He felt whole. He turned his gaze to Akaza, who had just arrived on the perimeter. The upper rank 3 hesitated. He saw what happened to Hantengu. This was not combat. This was predation. Vader spoke, his voice amplified by the storm booming across the valley. He announced that their king was a coward who hid in a castle while his servants died. He challenged Muzan to show himself. He began to squeeze the air around the remaining upper moons, binding them in a telekinetic stasis field. Gyokodoma, even Kokushibo, struggled against the invisible weight. They were being held in place like insects in amber. Vader was preparing to sacrifice them all at once. He would use their combined death to send a signal that would ripple through the multiverse. He would tear the veil. This was the small choice that would lead to the massive outcome. He could have simply killed them and ruled Japan. But his ambition was galactic. He chose to risk the stability of this entire dimension to call his master. He began the incantation in High Sith, a language that caused the very stones of the mountain to crack. The sky above the village turned a bruised purple lightning, striking not down but up from the earth into the clouds. Tanjiro saw the danger. He understood that if Vader finished that ritual, Japan would be swallowed by the void. He had to act. He looked at Nezuko. He looked at his friends. He told them that they could not fight Vader. They had to break the ritual. They had to free the demons. It was an insane command. To save the demons who had killed their families. Sanemi Shinazugawa, who had crawled up the ridge with them, grabbed Tanjiro by the collar, screaming that he was a traitor. But Tanjiro's eyes were hard. He explained that Vader was the greater evil. If the demons died in that vortex, the world died with them. He broke free and dove down the ridge. He did not draw his sword to kill. He drew his sword to sever the connection. He used the breath of the sun dance of the fire god. He moved through the storm, dodging the debris, his body screaming as the pressure of the force weighed on him. He aimed not for Vader, but for the invisible cables of energy connecting Vader to the trapped upper moons. He saw the opening thread, but it was twisted and black. He struck. He slashed through the telekinetic bond, holding Akaza. The connection snapped with the sound of a breaking violin string. Akaza fell to the ground, released from the stasis. He looked at the boy who had saved him. Confusion warred with bloodlust. Tangiro shouted at him to run, to take the others and run. Vader roared a sound of pure frustration. The interruption had destabilized the ritual. The energy he had gathered backlashed. The cyclone exploded outward. Vader was thrown back, slamming into the remains of the forge. The upper moons were released. They did not attack. They fled. Their self-preservation instinct overrode Muzan's command. They scattered into the night, terrified by the near-death experience of having their souls eaten. Vader rose from the debris. His armor was smoking. The ritual had failed. The signal had not been sent. He looked at the boy standing in the clearing. Tanjiro Kamado stood panting, his sword shaking. He had saved the monsters to save the world. Vader ignited his saber. He walked toward Tanjiro. The boy had made a choice. He had chosen the status quo of the demon war over the new order of the Empire. He had chosen to prolong the suffering of his people rather than submit to a higher power. Vader found this moral calculus flawed. He raised his blade, but he paused. The backlash of the ritual had done something. The sky had not returned to normal. The purple bruise remained. The sun began to rise, but it was wrong. The light was dim grey and sickly. The ritual had not opened a door, but it had cracked the window. The bleeding effect had begun. The laws of physics in this region were permanently damaged. Gravity was lighter here now. Shadows moved on their own, and something else had come through. Not a fleet, but a frequency. Vader's helmet receiver crackled. Through the static, through the dimensional interference, a voice cut through. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Lord Vader, report. It was the Emperor. The signal had been a failure as a transport vector, but a success as a communication burst. Vader lowered his sword. He had established contact. He looked at Tanjiro. He told the boy that he had brought his world a reprieve, but he had also signed his death warrant. The Empire now knew where they were. Vader deactivated his saber. He turned his back on the Slayer. He had work to do. He had to prepare the landing zone. The strategic condition had shifted from survival to preparation for invasion. Tanjiro collapsed to his knees as the metal man walked away into the unnatural grey dawn. The demons were gone. The village was gone. But the fear remained. He looked at his hands. He had saved Akaza. He had saved Kokushibo. He had unleashed them back onto the world to stop the void. The weight of that decision crushed him. He heard the footsteps of the Hashira coming down the hill. He saw the look in Sanemi's eyes. It was not gratitude. It was betrayal. The alliance of the Slayers was fracturing. The stress of the crossover was tearing them apart. And in the distance, the sound of Vader's mechanical breathing seemed to sync with the heartbeat of the planet counting down to zero. The horrific realization that the war had just become infinite. The breach was open. Palpatine was listening, and the Demon Slayer universe was no longer a closed system. It was now a target on an Imperial star chart. The fracture in the sky above Japan did not heal. The grey sickness that had seeped through the ritual site in the Swordsmith village began to spread like gangrene across the atmospheric layers of the Kanto region, converting the blue of the sky into a stagnant, heavy, leaden hue that blocked out the true warmth of the sun, and replaced it with a radioactive glare that offered no comfort. The birds did not sing, because they were dead, littering the forest floors with burst hearts, unable to cope with the fluctuating gravitational anomalies that now rippled through the archipelago like invisible tremors. In the aftermath of the failed ritual and the escape of the upper moons, the Demon Slayer Corps had retreated to a safe house deep in the mountains of the north, but the safety was an illusion. The internal cohesion of the organization was shattering. In the dimly lit main room of the hidden temple, Sanemi Shinazugawa had his sword drawn, the tip trembling an inch from Tanjiro Kamado's throat. The wind, Hashira's face, was a mask of betrayal, his veins bulging as he screamed that Tanjiro was a collaborator, a traitor who had chosen to save the spawn of hell rather than let the metal monster finish them. Tanjiro did not flinch. He knelt on the tatami mats, his hands on his knees, looking up with eyes that were old and tired. He spoke softly, saying that if Vader had completed the ritual, there would be no world left to save. He argued that a war with demons was a war they understood, but a war with the void was a war against extinction. Giyu Tomioka stood between them, his hand on Sanemi's hilt, his silence heavy and absolute. The other Hashira were scattered around the room, nursing their wounds, their spirits broken not by defeat, but by the revelation of their own insignificance. They were ants fighting over a crumb of bread, while a boot descended from the heavens. But the debate was rendered academic by the vibration of the earth. It started as a low hum, a frequency that rattled the teeth in their skulls and tipped the teacups on the trays. It was not an earthquake. It was a summons. Far away in the geometric impossibility of the Infinity Castle, Kibutsuji Muzan sat on his throne, his body regenerating from the stress of the near apocalypse. But his mind was fracturing. He could feel it. The marker. When Tanjiro had severed the connection, he had saved the demons physically, but he had left a psychic scar, a tracking beacon that Vader could see through the Force. Muzan ordered Nakimi, the demon of the Baiwa, to shift the castle, to move them to the deepest dimension, to hide in the cracks of reality. Nakime struck her Baiwa, the strings twanging with a frantic urgency. The castle shifted rooms, rotating corridors, twisting gravity, inverting. But it did not move. The dimension was anchored. Muzan stood up, fear for the first time in a millennium turning his blood to ice. He looked up at the endless wooden ceiling of his fortress and saw it begin to buckle. Vader stood on the peak of Mount Fuji. He had moved there in the hours following the battle, seeking the highest point, the axis mundi of this island nation. He was plugged into the planetary ley lines, his suit absorbing the geothermal energy of the dormant volcano. His mind extended like a net over the entire country. He felt the rat trying to scuttle into the dark. He felt the Infinity Castle shifting. He reached out with both hands, the servos in his armor whining, the black cape whipping in a wind that smelled of sulfur and ozone. He did not knock on the door of the dimension. He tore the door off its hinges, with a roar that was amplified by the force Vader pulled. He visualized the dimensional pocket where Muzan hid, and he dragged it into the material plane. The sky above Tokyo tore open. It was a sound like the sky screaming. Clouds were sucked into a vortex of purple lightning, and from the wound in reality, the Infinity Castle fell. It did not land softly. The massive, impossible structure crashing into the chaotic urban sprawl of early 20th century Tokyo, crushing whole districts under its weight. Wood splintered, stone shattered, and the laws of physics wept. The castle, which was effectively infinite, unfolded like a malignant origami flower, spreading its chaotic architecture across the city. Staircases led to nowhere, towers hung upside down from the clouds, and rooms opened into the open air. The masquerade was over. The hidden war was now a public cataclysm. Vader descended from the mountain. He did not walk. He leapt, crossing kilometers in single bounds, powered by the Force, landing in the center of the ruined capital. He stood before the gates of the fallen castle, his presence a void that swallowed the light. He ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade humming with anticipation. He broadcast a mental command to every living thing in the city: submission or death. The civilians who survived the impact fled in a stampede of terror, but the Slayers, sensing the finality of the moment, moved toward the crash site. They had no choice. If Muzan died by Vader's hand, the world belonged to the Empire. If Vader died by Muzan's hand, the demons would rule forever. They had to be the third variable. They had to be the chaotic element that broke the binary. Inside the wreckage of the castle, the demons were in a panic. The sunlight was blocked by the thick supernatural smog Vader's arrival had generated, allowing them to operate in the day, but they were trapped. Nakime tried to strum her biwa to eject the intruder, but the string snapped. She looked down at her hands and saw them trembling. Vader was walking through the front hall. He did not navigate the maze. He walked in a straight line. When a wall blocked his path, he blasted it into dust. When a room rotated to drop him, he levitated. He was a glitch in the system. He reached the central chamber, where the remaining upper moons waited. Akaza, Kokushibo, and Doma stood shoulder to shoulder, a trinity of monsters forced into cooperation. They attacked as one. Doma summoned the blizzard, a giant Buddha of ice that breathed frozen death. Vader countered with pyrokinesis, drawing the heat from the burning city outside and channeling it into a wave of fire that melted the ice god in seconds. The steam explosion blinded them. Through the mist, Akaza struck. Moving at the speed of sound, his fists aimed at the life support panel. Vader caught the fist. He did not crush it. He twisted it, using the momentum to throw Akaza into Doma. The two demons tangled, tumbling through a paper wall. Kokushibo seized the opening. Breath of the moon's 16th form. Moonbow half moon. A giant slash of chaotic blades descended from the ceiling. Vader looked up. He did not block. He caught the blade with the force, stopping the flesh sword in mid-air. The eyes on the blade blinked in confusion. Vader clenched his fist. The sword exploded. Kokushibo stepped back, his samurai code shattering along with his weapon. Vader stepped forward. He told the first upper moon that his path of the warrior was a lie. He was just a frightened man afraid of death. Vader swung his saber. Kokushibo tried to regenerate the sword, but he was too slow. The plasma blade sheared through his neck. But Vader did not stop there. He used the force to hold the head in place, preventing it from flying away, preventing the body from crumbling. He stared into the 6 eyes of the demon. He poured the dark side into the severed head, crushing the demon's will, forcing him to acknowledge his own obsolescence. Kokushibo crumbled not from the sun, but from despair. He faded into ash, leaving only his clothes. Akaza roared, pulling himself free from the wreckage. He charged again, but he stopped. He saw Tangiro standing on a floating platform above them, the boy having arrived with the Hashira. Akaza remembered. He remembered the boy cutting the bond. He remembered the mercy. For a split second the demon hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. Vader did not hesitate. He threw his lightsaber. The blade spun through the air, a disk of red death. It sliced through Akaza's torso, bisecting him. The demon fell, looking up at the boy. He did not regenerate. He smiled a sad human smile and let the darkness take him. 2 upper moons down. Doma laughed, clapping his hands, delighted by the show. He asked Vader if he could be turned into a cyborg too. Vader extended his hand and crushed Doma's lungs. The demon gasped, choking on his own blood. Vader lifted him into the air and slammed him into the floor continuously, rhythmically, until the demon was nothing but a paste of frozen meat and bone that could not reform because the structure was too thoroughly pulverized. Vader stood alone in the antechamber. The path to the throne was open. He walked forward, climbing the stairs to the highest platform where Muzan waited. The Demon King stood in his final form, a grotesque mass of mouths and whips, his skin armored in bone, his ego bruised but unbroken. Muzan looked at the machine man. He sneered. He said that Vader was nothing but a broken human hiding in a shell. He claimed that he, Muzan, was the perfect being, the apex of evolution. Vader stopped 10 paces away. He did not ignite his saber. He hooked his thumbs in his belt. He told Muzan that he was not a god. He was a disease, and diseases were cured. Muzan shrieked and unleashed his whips. Thousands of bladed tentacles lashed out, moving faster than the eye could follow. They struck Vader. They wrapped around him. They tried to absorb him. Muzan's digestive enzymes ate at the armor, trying to reach the flesh. But the armor held, and then the armor fought back. Vader released a pulse of force repulse, so violent that it stripped the flesh from Muzan's whips, leaving only the bone, which then shattered. Muzan recoiled, screaming. Vader walked through the storm of gore. He reached out and gripped Muzan by the throat. The Demon King tried to shapeshift to turn into liquid to escape. Vader held the liquid. He held the concept of the demon. He used the force to compress Muzan, to squeeze the biomass into a smaller and smaller shape. Muzan thrashed his mind, lashing out with psychic attacks, trying to break Vader's concentration. He showed Vader visions of Padme, visions of Luke, visions of Shmi. Vader consumed the visions. He ate the pain. He used it to tighten his grip. Suddenly, the wall of the throne room exploded. The Hashira attacked. Gyome, Sanemi-Giyu, and Tangiro. They did not attack Vader. They attacked Muzan. They saw the Demon King trapped, and they saw their chance to end the millennium of terror. Stone, water, wind, and sun converged on the compressed form of Muzan. But their attacks never connected. Vader waved his hand backhanded, and a wall of force slammed into the Slayers, knocking them out of the air. They crashed onto the wooden platforms, broken and bleeding. Vader did not look at them. He was focused on his prize. He did not want to kill Muzan. He wanted to possess him. The Emperor had demanded a report. The Emperor sought eternal life. This creature had solved the biological riddle of immortality. Vader would not destroy such a resource. He would package it. He slammed Muzan onto the floor, pinning him with gravity. He withdrew a device from his belt, a portable containment unit he had fabricated in the village. It was a stasis field generator. He activated it. A pyramid of red light formed around the screaming Demon King. Muzan clawed at the light, his body dissolving and reforming in a loop of agony. He begged. He offered Vader the world. He offered him the blue spider lily. Vader ignored the bargaining. He adjusted the frequency. The field collapsed, shrinking Muzan, until he was trapped in a prism of energy no larger than a lantern. The screaming stopped. The Demon King, the scourge of Japan, was gone, not dead, collected. Vader picked up the prism. He looked at the Slayers who were struggling to stand. Tangiro was weeping. He knew what had happened. The demons were not gone. The power had simply changed hands. Vader attached the prism to his belt. He looked at Tangiro. He told the boy that the war was over. The order had arrived. He walked to the edge of the floating platform and looked out over the ruined city of Tokyo. The smoke was clearing, and in the sky the purple bruise was opening again. But this time it was not a chaotic tear. It was a geometric gateway. Through the haze, the triangular shadow of an Imperial star destroyer began to emerge, descending from the upper atmosphere. The Chimera, Grand Admiral Thrawn, had followed the signal. The arrival of the ship silenced the city. The sheer scale of the vessel eclipsed the mountains. It was a city in the sky, a weapon of such magnitude that the concept of resistance evaporated from the minds of the populace. The demon slayers watched in horror. They had trained to fight monsters in the dark. They had no technique to fight a moon-sized ship that blotted out the sun. Vader watched the ship descend. He felt the cold satisfaction of a job completed. He had secured the asset. He had pacified the locals. He had prepared the landing zone. But the victory was not clean. The bleeding effect had permanently altered the physics of the planet. The presence of the Star Destroyer in the atmosphere caused tidal waves along the coast. The gravity of the massive ship pulled at the tectonic plates, triggering earthquakes. The use of the dark side on such a scale had poisoned the spiritual energy of Japan. The wisteria flowers withered and died, turning black. The spirits of the ancestors which had protected the land were silenced by the deafening roar of the ion engines. The world was safe from demons, but it was now a slave to the Sith. Tangiro stood up. He gripped his sword. His blade was chipped. His body was broken, but his spirit was the only thing that remained constant. He looked at Vader's back. He looked at the Star Destroyer. He looked at his friends. Giyu was unconscious. Sanemi was staring blankly at the sky. Gyome was praying. Tanjiro realized that the Demon Slayer Corps was dead. There was no place for them in this new order. They would be hunted not as heroes, but as insurgents. He sheathed his sword. It was a gesture of surrender, but also of concealment. He whispered to the others. He told them to scatter, to hide, to survive. He picked up Nezuko's box, which had been left on the platform. He turned and ran. He did not run toward the enemy. He ran into the shadows of the ruins, into the underground where the Empire's gaze could not reach. Vader heard them leave. He did not stop them. They were irrelevant. A few swordsmen could not stop a legion of stormtroopers. He let them go. They would be good sport for the Inquisitors. He would train from the local population. He watched as the first shuttle launched from the Star Destroyer, descending toward his position. The white armor of the stormtroopers gleamed in the sickly light. The ramp descended. An officer walked out, followed by a squad of troopers. The officer looked at the devastation, at the impossible architecture of the castle, at the black armored giant standing amidst the ruin. He swallowed his fear and saluted. He hailed Lord Vader. He reported that the Emperor was pleased with the acquisition of the new territory. Vader nodded. He touched the prism on his belt where Muzan screamed in silence. He told the officer to prepare a transmission. He had a gift for his master. The camera pulled back, rising above the ruins of the Infinity Castle, above the crushed streets of Tokyo, above the smoke and the fire. It showed the Star Destroyer hanging like a dagger over the heart of Japan. It showed the red flag of the Empire unfurling from the bridge. It showed the dark forest where the last of the demons hid, terrified of the new predator. And it showed the small figures of the slayers disappearing into the wilderness, becoming ghosts in their own country. The collision of worlds had ended not with a bang, but with the heavy, suffocating silence of occupation. The age of myths was over. The age of the machine had begun. The internal logic of the anime world, that spirit and willpower could overcome any odd, had been broken by the cold, hard materialism of the galactic superpower. Vader had not just defeated the antagonist, he had dismantled the genre. As the shuttle carried Vader up to the Star Destroyer, he looked down one last time at the world he had broken. He felt no remorse. He felt only the familiar cold comfort of order. The chaos of the demons was gone. The chaos of the slayers was marginalized. There was only the force in the Empire. And in the darkness of space, the stars looked different here. They were not the stars he knew, but they would burn just the same. The sound of the airlock sealing a mechanical hiss that sounded like a final breath leaving a dying body. The screen faded to black. Not a peaceful darkness, but the glossy, sterile black of a TIE fighter pilot's helmet. The story was done, the history was written, and the timeline was sealed in carbonite. The holocron recording designated Earth Taisho 99 flickers to life, revealing a landscape that no geographer of the original timeline would recognize. 5 years have passed since the arrival of the Chimera and the subsequent annexation of the Japanese archipelago into the Galactic Empire. The pristine cedar forests that once hid the secrets of the demons have been strip-mined, their lumber processed to fuel the orbital shipyards that now encircle the planet like a ring of iron. Mount Fuji no longer sits in serene isolation, but serves as the geothermal anchor for the primary planetary shield generator, a massive durasteel spire that pierces the clouds and hums with a low-frequency vibration that can be felt in the bones of every citizen from Hokkaido to Okinawa. The demon threat which had plagued the nation for a millennium was eradicated not by the sun, but by the systematic efficiency of Imperial xenobiology divisions. The surviving lower moons and feral demons were hunted down by probe droids and incinerated by orbital bombardment, their regeneration factors unable to cope with the sheer volume of thermal energy deployed against them. The few that survived were captured and shipped off-world to the secret cloning facilities on Wayland, where their biology is currently being dissected, to unlock the secrets of cellular immortality for the Emperor. Tokyo has been rebuilt as a sector capital, a dystopian fusion of Taisho-era aesthetics and brutalist imperial architecture, where stormtroopers patrol the streets alongside local auxiliary police, armed with stun batons and mass-produced vibro katanas. The citizens walk with their heads down their eyes, averted from the propaganda holograms that project the masked face of Lord Vader onto the sides of the skyscrapers. The breathing techniques, once the sacred art of a secret society, have been outlawed, classified as subversive insurgent combat forms. Anyone caught practicing total concentration breathing is arrested by the Inquisitorius, a new branch of the local government led by a dark armored warrior who was once known as the Wind Hashira, before the torture and the reconditioning broke his mind. Sanemi Shinazugawa now hunts his former comrades with a red lightsaber and a hatred that has been surgically redirected toward the rebellion. Deep in the unmapped ravines of the northern mountains, where the sensor nets of the Empire cannot penetrate, the resistance survives. Tanjiro Kamado sits by a smokeless fire, his hari tattered and stained with oil and coolant. He is no longer the boy with the kind eyes. He is a scarred veteran of a war that spans stars he has never seen. On his hip hangs a weapon he constructed from salvage, a rough, uneven lightsaber powered by a cracked Nichirin crystal that emits a volatile black blade. He is not teaching his students how to smell the opening thread or how to behead a demon. He is teaching them how to sabotage walker joints, how to scramble comms frequencies, and how to use the breath of the sun to deflect blaster bolts. Nezuko sits beside him, no longer in a box, but wearing a hooded cloak, her demon nature suppressed not by hypnosis, but by a stolen Imperial dampening collar that keeps her hunger at bay while allowing her to retain her strength. They are the ghosts in the machine, the glitches in the perfect order Vader left behind. They know they cannot win. They know that the fleet above is invincible. But they fight because it is the only human thing left to do. They fight to remind the galaxy that this world once had a soul. Far away in the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine stands before a stasis tank in his private laboratory. Inside the tank, suspended in a nutrient solution, is the regenerating form of Kibutsuji Muzan. The creature is awake, his eyes darting frantically in the liquid screaming silently as probes harvest his DNA. Palpatine smiles, his yellow eyes reflecting the twisted biology of the subject. The acquisition of this dimension was a trivial military exercise, but a monumental scientific victory. The secret of conquering death without the Force has been found. The project proceeds. The timeline has been irrevocably altered. The Demon Slayer universe is no longer a story of samurai and monsters. It is a footnote in the archives of the Sith, a resource colony that provided the raw material for the Empire's eternal reign. The recording ends not with a message of hope, but with the sound of a closing door sealing the fate of a world that was too small to survive the collision with the infinite dark.